Aurora Aero 7 test field, blazing noon sun. A female CEO in a white jumpsuit stood before a prototype helicopter that had never been test flown. Crowds of engineers, media, and shareholders surrounded her. "Fly this helicopter and I'll marry you," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. A man in oil-stained coveralls stood in the sunlight, silently watching her. "You're not brave enough to fly it, but arrogant enough to dare someone else to do what you're afraid of." He stepped forward and flipped the ignition switch. The engine roared to life. The display screen showed, "System, Ward Eagle engine calibrated." The entire test field froze. The name he'd just read on the system was the original inventor. Ethan Ward wiped the grease from his hands and checked his tool belt. 36 years old, single dad, former rescue pilot, now working as a maintenance technician at Aurora Aviation. His daughter Maya stood in the crowd, clutching a small bracelet that read, "Fly safe, Dad." 9 years old. She loved drawing airplanes and believed her father could fix anything that flew. "Daddy, why don't you tell them you used to be a pilot?" Maya had asked that morning. "Because sometimes, sweetheart, it's better to let people think what they want. The truth has a way of showing itself." Today was the big unveiling. Aurora Aviation's revolutionary hybrid helicopter, designed to change the future of aviation. The press was here. The investors were watching. Everything was riding on this demonstration. At the center of it all stood Aurora Lynn, 30 years old, cold, brilliant, arrogant. She'd inherited the company from her father, but knew nothing about the old engineering team that had built her empire. Aurora stepped up to the microphone, her white jumpsuit pristine under the blazing sun. "Ladies and gentlemen, this aircraft represents a breakthrough that no one has achieved before. If anyone here can actually fly this machine, I'll marry them." The crowd erupted in laughter. Shareholders chuckled. Media crews zoomed in for reaction shots. From the maintenance area, Ethan continued cleaning the rotor blades, his expression unreadable. A shareholder in an expensive suit spotted him and called out mockingly, "Hey, mechanic, the boss lady just offered the ultimate prize. You brave enough to try?" Aurora's laugh was sharp and cutting. "Him? He probably can't even tell the difference between the start button and the radio." Maya squeezed her father's hand tighter. "Daddy, they're being mean." Ethan knelt down to her level. "Remember what I taught you, sweetheart? Never let anyone laugh at what you know. But also, don't fly to show off," Maya recited. "Fly to remind them you still have wings. That's my girl." The demonstration was supposed to begin, but the prototype suddenly displayed error messages. Warning lights flashed. The lead engineer looked panicked. "What's happening?" Aurora demanded. "Why won't it start?" The chief technician ran diagnostics frantically. "The system is locked. Something's wrong with the calibration sequence." Aurora's face went red with embarrassment. The press was capturing every moment of the malfunction. Investors were whispering among themselves. "Can anyone fix this?" she called out desperately. That's when Ethan spoke, his voice cutting through the chaos. "It's not broken. It's waiting for someone who understands it." Aurora spun around. "Excuse me?" "The Ward Eagle hybrid system," Ethan said calmly. "It has a specific startup protocol, safety measures built in by the original designer." "And how would you know that?" Ethan stepped toward the helicopter, Maya's bracelet catching the sunlight on his wrist. "Because sometimes the person you're laughing at is the person who built what you're standing on." The crowd went quiet. Aurora's confidence wavered for the first time. Ethan approached the cockpit and placed his hand on the control panel. The screen flickered, then displayed his name. "Ward Eagle engine calibrated. Welcome back, Commander Ward." Aurora's face went white. "Ward, you're, the original test pilot, the one who worked with your father to design this system." Ethan's voice was steady without bitterness. "The one who was flying the day he died." The entire test field fell silent. Press cameras swiveled toward this man in coveralls who had just revealed himself as the ghost of Aurora Aviation's past. Maya smiled up at her father with pure pride. "Are you going to show them your wings now, Daddy?" Ethan looked at Aurora, whose arrogance had crumbled into confusion and something that might have been fear. "Only if they're ready to see them. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from." Maybe somewhere out there, someone else is being laughed at for doing what they believe in. If you believe that silence is sometimes stronger than applause, hit subscribe to see what happens when the truth takes flight. Aurora stared at the display screen, her face pale. Commander Ward, you're the test pilot who worked with your father? Yes. Ethan's voice was steady without accusation. Who was there the day he died? The crowd pressed closer, sensing they were witnessing something historic. The media crews pushed forward with their cameras. Aurora crossed her arms defensively. If that's true, then prove it. If you can actually fly this prototype, go ahead. But if you crash it, you're personally liable for the damages. The crowd murmured. This was getting serious. Ethan looked at Maya, who nodded encouragingly. Then he climbed into the cockpit. The MC grabbed his microphone, sensing a story. Ladies and gentlemen, Aurora Lynn has just challenged her own maintenance worker to fly a prototype worth $50 million. Let's see what this grease monkey can do. The crowd erupted in cruel laughter. Phones came out to record what they expected to be an epic failure. Ethan settled into the pilot's seat and placed Maya's fly-safe bracelet on the dashboard. His hands moved across the controls with muscle memory. He pressed the ignition sequence. The engine rumbled to life, then stopped. Aurora's laugh was sharp and triumphant. As I expected, he doesn't understand the hybrid propulsion system. Actually, Ethan said through the open cockpit, I understand it perfectly, but this machine wasn't designed to show off. It was designed to save lives. He looked directly at Aurora. Your father taught me that every flight should honor the people who didn't make it home. The crowd quieted. Something in his tone made them listen. Before every test flight, your father would say a prayer for the pilots who died perfecting aviation. He'd never start an engine without remembering them. Aurora's expression flickered. She remembered her father's rituals, his reverence for flight. You want me to fly this machine? Ethan continued. Then you need to understand what it really represents. He began the proper startup sequence. Not the flashy demonstration version, but the careful, methodical process her father had designed. Ward Eagle hybrid system, he explained as he worked. Your father combined my rescue experience with his engineering genius. Every safety protocol in this machine was written in blood and tested in storms. The rotors began to turn slowly, building power gradually. You see, Aurora, your father died because the board pressured him to skip safety checks. They wanted a spectacular demo, just like today. Aurora's face went white. That's not. The official report said mechanical failure. The official report was written by lawyers, not pilots. Ethan's hands never paused on the controls. I was there. I know what really happened. The helicopter began to lift, hovering 3 feet off the ground. Steady as a rock, the crowd had gone completely silent. This wasn't the dramatic failure they'd expected. Your father pushed me out of the cockpit that day, Ethan said through the radio. Took the controls himself when the system failed. He saved my life and the lives of everyone on the ground. Aurora's hands were shaking. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because dead heroes don't generate lawsuits. Dead heroes just generate insurance claims. The helicopter rose higher, performing a perfect hover pattern. Every movement was precise, controlled. Aurora's assistant whispered urgently in her ear, showing her a tablet. Ma'am, I'm reading Commander Ward's file. He has over 3,000 flight hours, recipient of the Aviation Safety Medal. He's legendary in rescue aviation. Aurora felt sick. She'd been mocking a hero. Through the radio, Ethan's voice continued, calm and professional. Ward Eagle system performing nominally, all safety parameters green, hybrid propulsion operating at optimal efficiency. He brought the helicopter down in a perfect landing, the skids touching the ground with barely a whisper. The crowd erupted in applause, but it was different now. Respectful. Awed. Ethan climbed out of the cockpit and handed Aurora a small burnt piece of paper. Your father gave me this the morning he died. Said to give it to you when you were ready to understand what he built. Aurora unfolded the paper with trembling hands. Her father's handwriting. For Aurora, to fly again, but never forget why we fly. Love, Dad. Tears streamed down her face. He, he named the company after me. He named it after the daughter he hoped would carry on his mission, to make flying safer for everyone. The press was going crazy, but Aurora only had eyes for the man she'd been mocking minutes before. Commander Ward, Ethan, I'm sorry, I didn't know. You weren't supposed to know. Your father wanted you to find your own way to the sky. Aurora looked at the helicopter, then at the crowd of investors and engineers watching her every move. What you just did. Can you teach our pilots to fly like that? I can teach them to fly like your father would have wanted, with respect for the machine and the people depending on it. Maya ran up to her dad, beaming with pride. Daddy, that was beautiful. Thank you, sweetheart. He knelt down to hug her. Sometimes the most important flights are the quiet ones. Aurora watched father and daughter together, realizing she'd just witnessed something more valuable than any business deal. She'd seen what her father's legacy really looked like, and it wasn't about the money or the technology. It was about the people who believed flying could make the world better. The cameras kept rolling as Aurora made a decision that would change everything. Aurora clutched her father's note, her hands trembling. The company records, they said the crash was mechanical failure, engine malfunction. Ethan's expression darkened. Your board of directors paid a lot of money to make sure that's what the record said. What do you mean? Your father discovered safety violations in the manufacturing process, corners being cut to meet investor deadlines. He was going to expose it all the day he died. Aurora's face went pale. You're saying someone wanted him dead. I'm saying someone wanted him quiet. The crash was supposed to look like pilot error, but your father was too good a pilot to make the mistakes they claimed. The crowd around them had grown larger, sensing drama. Investors, engineers, and media crews pressed closer. That's when Aurora's phone buzzed with an urgent message from her head of security. Ma'am, her assistant whispered, there's something you need to see. Now. Aurora looked at the tablet screen. Security footage from the hangar, time-stamped from earlier that morning. In the video, a man in a suit was tampering with the helicopter's control systems, installing something, hiding wires. That's, Aurora's blood ran cold. That's Marcus Chen, my vice president. Ethan looked at the footage. What's he installing? I don't know, but... Aurora's eyes widened in horror. He's been pushing for this demonstration for months. Said it would secure the biggest investor deal in company history. That's when they heard it. A low beeping sound coming from the helicopter. Ethan spun around, his pilot instinct screaming danger. Everyone back, now! What is it? Aurora asked. Remote override system. Someone's taking control of the aircraft. The helicopter's rotors began spinning without anyone in the cockpit. The engine noise grew louder. Panic rippled through the crowd as people realized the unmanned aircraft was powering up. It's going to lift off on its own. Someone screamed. Ethan ran toward the helicopter, but Aurora grabbed his arm. Don't, it's too dangerous. If that aircraft goes airborne without a pilot, it'll crash into the crowd. Hundreds of people will die. Through the chaos, Ethan spotted Marcus Chen at the edge of the test field, speaking urgently into a phone. Their eyes met across the distance. Marcus smiled coldly and pressed something on a small device. The helicopter lurched upward, spinning out of control. He's trying to crash it, Aurora screamed. He wants to destroy the company. Ethan didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the spinning aircraft and dove into the cockpit just as it lifted off the ground. Inside the cockpit, warning alarms blared. The controls were locked in autonomous mode, following commands from Marcus's remote device. But Ethan knew this system better than anyone. He'd helped design it. Override code, Ward Eagle 77 Alpha. He spoke into the voice recognition system. Access denied, the computer responded. The helicopter spun higher, completely out of control now. Through the cockpit window, Ethan could see the crowd below, scattering in terror. Maya, he called out, seeing his daughter in the crowd. Get everyone to the safety bunkers. Aurora was on the ground, shouting into her radio. Cut the power to the entire field. Shut down all remote systems. We can't, her chief engineer replied. He's using an independent power source. The helicopter was now 50 feet up and climbing, its flight path erratic and dangerous. Ethan tried every override code he knew. Nothing worked. That's when he remembered something Aurora's father had told him years ago. Every system has a heart, Ethan, and if you know how to speak to the heart. Ethan pulled out the burnt piece of paper Aurora had shown him, her father's handwriting. He looked at the words, "For Aurora to fly again." He typed those exact words into the manual override terminal. "Voice recognition required," the computer announced. Ethan took a deep breath and spoke in the exact tone and cadence of Aurora's father, a voice he'd heard thousands of times during their flights together. "For Aurora to fly again." The computer paused. "Voice pattern recognized. Welcome, James Lynn. Manual control restored." The helicopter immediately stabilized. Ethan took control of the stick and began a careful descent. But Marcus wasn't finished. Through the radio, they could hear him screaming into his phone, "Activate the backup protocol. Crash it into the main hangar." Suddenly, the helicopter's engines began overheating. Warning lights flashed red across the dashboard. "He's overriding the engine safety system," Ethan realized, "trying to cause a catastrophic failure." The aircraft began losing altitude fast, but not in a controlled descent. It was falling. With the ground rushing up toward him, Ethan made a split-second decision. He switched the helicopter into auto-rotation mode, a dangerous emergency procedure where the rotors spin freely, using the aircraft's downward momentum to generate lift. It was a technique that required perfect timing and nerves of steel. One mistake would mean certain death. The crowd below watched in horror as the helicopter fell like a stone, its engines silent. "He's going to crash!" Aurora screamed. But Ethan wasn't crashing, he was flying. At the last possible moment, he pulled back on the collective, using the stored energy in the spinning rotors to cushion the landing. The helicopter touched down hard but intact, just 20 feet from where Aurora stood. Ethan climbed out of the cockpit, his hands steady despite what he'd just survived. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Ethan's attention was on Marcus Chen, who was trying to slip away in the confusion. "Security!" Aurora shouted. "Stop him!" Marcus pulled out a gun, pointing it at the crowd. "Nobody move!" This was supposed to be simple. "You killed my father," Aurora said, walking toward him despite the weapon. "Your father was going to destroy everything. The safety violations, the cost overruns. He would have bankrupted the company. So you murdered him. I saved the company, and I would have saved it again by eliminating his legacy project." That's when Ethan stepped forward. "The only thing you eliminated was your own future." Marcus spun toward him. "You should have died with James Lynn 10 years ago." "Maybe, but I didn't. And now everyone knows the truth." Police sirens wailed in the distance. Marcus looked around wildly, realizing he was trapped. In a final act of desperation, he aimed the gun at Aurora. "If I can't have the company, no one can." But Ethan was already moving. Years of rescue training kicked in as he tackled Marcus to the ground. The gun went off harmlessly into the air. As the police led Marcus away in handcuffs, Aurora stood looking at the man who had just risked everything to save her and her father's legacy. "Ethan, will you help me rebuild this company the right way?" Ethan looked at Maya, who was running toward him. "I'll help you build something worth flying for." Within hours, the story had exploded across aviation news networks and social media worldwide. CEO's father murdered, single dad pilot exposes decade-old conspiracy, dominated headlines everywhere. The footage of Ethan's emergency auto-rotation landing was being called the most heroic piloting of the decade by aviation experts. "Fly This Helicopter" was trending globally, along with Shanar Commander Ward and Aurora Aviation. Comments flooded in from pilots around the world. That auto-rotation was textbook perfect under impossible conditions. This man is a legend in the aviation community. Aurora owes everything to Commander Ward. Justice for James Lynn. But while the media circus exploded outside, Ethan was in a small conference room at Aurora Aviation, holding Maya's hand as FBI agents took a statement. "Mr. Ward," Agent Martinez said, "your testimony is crucial to this case. Marcus Chen has been charged with murder in the first degree for James Lynn's death, and attempted murder for today's attack." "What happens to the company?" Ethan asked. "That's up to Ms. Lynn now, but thanks to your actions, we have everything we need to prosecute the entire conspiracy." Aurora knocked on the door and entered, looking exhausted but determined. "The board of directors is meeting in an emergency session," she said. "3 of them have already been arrested as co-conspirators. The others are demanding my resignation." "Why?" "Because I'm too emotional to run the company. Because I lack judgment for trusting a maintenance worker over my own VP." Agent Martinez gathered his files. "We'll need additional statements from both of you, but for now, you're free to go." After the FBI left, Aurora collapsed into a chair. "Ethan, I don't know what to do. The investors are pulling out. The military contracts are being reviewed. Everything my father built is falling apart." "Your father built something that survived a murder and a cover-up for 10 years, Ethan said quietly. "It's stronger than you think." "But I'm not. I spent my whole life thinking I was running a legitimate company. Now I find out it was built on lies and blood money." Maya tugged on Aurora's sleeve. "Miss Aurora, my daddy says when something breaks, you don't throw it away. You fix it better than before." Aurora smiled sadly at the little girl. "Your daddy is very wise." "He is. And he says broken things can fly again if you fix them with love." That evening, Aurora called an emergency press conference. The media filled the hangar where her father had died. Cameras focused on the podium where she stood alone. 10 years ago, my father James Lynn was murdered for trying to expose safety violations in this company. Today I learned that the man who killed him has been my vice president for the past 5 years. The crowd murmured, cameras flashing. I also learned that the man who risked his life to expose this conspiracy, the man who saved dozens of lives today, has been working in our maintenance department. Overlooked, undervalued, dismissed. She looked directly at the camera. Commander Ethan Ward is one of the most decorated rescue pilots in aviation history. He worked with my father to design the Ward Eagle hybrid system, and today he honored my father's memory by choosing to save lives over personal safety. Aurora pulled out a document. Effective immediately, I'm appointing Commander Ward as Chief of Aviation Safety for Aurora Aviation. His first mandate is to review every aircraft we've ever built and ensure they meet the safety standards my father died defending. "What about the board's vote of no confidence?" a reporter called out. "The board members who aren't in jail have decided to support my leadership. Apparently, having the FBI arrest your colleagues for murder tends to clarify priorities." Aurora smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. "But more importantly, I want to honor a promise I made earlier today. I said I'd marry anyone who could fly that helicopter." The crowd leaned forward, sensing a moment. Commander Ward proved he could not only fly it, but land it safely under conditions that would have killed any other pilot. Ethan, watching from the back of the hangar with Maya, started to look uncomfortable. "However," Aurora continued, "I've learned that the most important promises aren't made in public for show. They're made quietly, between people who trust each other." She looked directly at Ethan. "So I'm not asking Commander Ward to marry me. I'm asking him to help me rebuild this company into something my father would be proud of. Something worthy of the Ward Eagle name." After the press conference, Aurora found Ethan and Maya in the hangar, looking at the helicopter that had nearly killed them both. "You didn't have to do that," Ethan said. "Do what?" "Give me the job. I know it's just for show, to calm the investors." Aurora shook her head. "It's not for show. I meant every word. This company needs someone who understands what my father believed in." Maya was drawing on a small notepad, sketching the helicopter with careful detail. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" Aurora asked. "The airplane that helped Daddy save you," Maya said. "I'm going to put it on the refrigerator so everyone remembers that broken things can fly again." Aurora knelt down next to the little girl. "Maya, can I tell you something about your daddy?" "What?" "He didn't just save me today. He saved my father's dream, and that's worth more than any amount of money." Ethan put his hand on Aurora's shoulder. "Your father's dream isn't dead, Aurora. It just needs the right pilot." Outside, the sun was setting over the test field where everything had changed. Tomorrow they would begin rebuilding Aurora Aviation from the ground up. But tonight, they had something more valuable than investors or contracts. They had the truth, and sometimes that's all you need to get airborne again. 1 month later, Aurora walked through the old workshop where Ethan and Maya were working on a scale model of the hybrid helicopter. The workshop had been transformed. Photos of James Lynn lined the walls alongside Aurora Aviation's safety achievements. In the center, a plaque read, "For Aurora, to fly again." "How's the investigation going?" Ethan asked, not looking up from the tiny rotor he was adjusting. "Marcus and 4 board members got life sentences. The families of my father's victims finally have justice." Aurora sat down beside them. "But more importantly, we've grounded every aircraft built during the corruption years. Full safety inspections." Maya looked up from her drawing. "Miss Aurora, why are you sad if the bad guys are in jail?" "I'm not sad, sweetheart. I'm just thinking about promises." Aurora pulled out the burnt note her father had left. "I made a joke about marrying whoever could fly that helicopter, but I've learned something about promises." She looked at Ethan. "The most important ones aren't made for show. They're made quietly between people who trust each other." Ethan finished the model and handed it to Maya. "What kind of promise are you thinking about?" "I want to partner with you, officially. Wardland Aviation, equal ownership, but only if you promise me something." "What?" "That we'll never build anything just to impress people. Everything we make has to honor the people who didn't make it home." Maya held up the completed model helicopter. "Daddy, it's perfect. Can we make it fly?" "Not yet, sweetheart, but someday." Aurora smiled, watching father and daughter together. "You know what I've learned? Sometimes the best flights are the ones that teach us we don't need to leave the ground to soar." Ethan looked at the workshop around them. Photos of Aurora's father, Maya's drawings, blueprints for aircraft that would save lives instead of just making money. "Your father would be proud of what you're building here." "We're building," Aurora corrected. "And Maya, when you're old enough, maybe you'll help us build something even better." "What's better than helicopters?" Maya asked. "Trust," Aurora said simply. "We're building trust." Outside, the sun set over Aurora Aviation's test field. Tomorrow they would test their first new aircraft built under the Wardland Partnership. But tonight, they had something more valuable than any machine. They had forgiveness. And sometimes, that's the only fuel you need to fly higher than you ever imagined. The camera pulled back as golden light filled the workshop, where broken things were learning to soar again. Where are you watching from? Which moment gave you chills? When he started the engine, or when she realized forgiveness was the highest flight of all? Share your emotions below. And if you believe courage isn't just in the cockpit, subscribe to Hero Dad Stories, where quiet stories make the whole world pause.